There is a unique kind of darkness that stains the history of the American Gilded Age, an era remembered for rapid industrial progress, vast fortunes, and extreme societal shifts. Yet beneath the glittering surface of 19th-century high society lay an underbelly of desperate financial schemes, intense greed, and cold-blooded violence. While modern audiences are endlessly saturated with stories of Jack the Ripper or Lizzie Borden, history has quietly buried some of its most psychological and shocking mysteries. In the late summer of 1868, the quiet, deeply religious farming community just outside Indianapolis, Indiana, became the epicenter of a horrific double homicide that would expose a web of high-stakes fraud, elite corruption, and a brilliant, terrifying mastermind. It became known to a captivated nation as the Cold Spring Murders, a case where the primary suspect was a respectable, soft-spoken housewife who wielded financial manipulation like a deadly weapon. To understand the tragedy that unfolded on the afternoon of September 12, 1868, one must understand the shifting economic landscape of post-Civil War America. Money was flowing rapidly, paper currency was relatively new, and the desire to strike it rich without manual labor was infectiously spreading. Into this environment stepped Jacob Young, a prominent and wealthy local businessman, and his devoted wife, Nancy Young. The couple was highly respected in Indianapolis society, known for their piety, their financial stability, and their involvement in civic life. On that warm September afternoon, the Youngs told their family members that they were heading out for a pleasant carriage ride to Cold Spring, a beautiful, scenic park area situated along the White River, just a few miles northwest of the city center. It was a common destination for wealthy urbanites looking to escape the dust of the city, but the Youngs were not traveling to Cold Spring merely for the fresh air. They were traveling to a secret rendezvous. As evening approached and the sun dipped below the Indiana horizon, the Youngs failed to return home. Their family began to grow anxious, but anxiety turned to absolute terror the following morning when a local farmer walking his livestock near the secluded woods of Cold Spring stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable carnage. Parked loosely in a clearing was the Youngs' pristine carriage, its horses still tethered but visibly escalated. A short distance away, lying in the damp grass beneath the towering oaks, were the bodies of Jacob and Nancy Young. The violence inflicted upon them was precise, brutal, and terrifyingly personal. Jacob Young had been shot directly through the back of the head at close range, the bullet traveling cleanly through his skull. His wife, Nancy, had suffered an even more gruesome fate. She had been shot in the face, and the killer had wrapped a heavy wool shawl around her head before setting it ablaze, leaving her upper body horribly charred. The Indianapolis police force, still in its infancy and unused to such sophisticated execution-style violence, immediately swarmed the woods of Cold Spring. The initial assumption of the detectives was that this was a highway robbery gone wrong. The area was known to occasionally harbor vagrants and outlaws who preyed on wealthy travelers. However, a closer examination of the bodies and the carriage quickly shattered that theory. Jacob Young's expensive gold pocket watch was still ticking in his vest pocket. His wallet, though emptied of large bills, still contained small change, and his wife's valuable gold jewelry remained entirely untouched on her person. The killer had not come for petty valuables or loose coins. This was a targeted execution meant to silence the couple forever, and the burning of Nancy Young's face suggested a desperate attempt to destroy evidence or express a deep, boiling hatred. The breakthrough in the investigation came when detectives began examining Jacob Young's personal office and his financial ledgers. They discovered that in the months leading up to his death, the naturally conservative businessman had become completely obsessed with a mysterious, highly secretive investment opportunity. He had been liquidating his tangible assets, drawing large sums of cash from his bank accounts, and borrowing heavily from his closest associates. The ledgers revealed that Jacob had handed over tens of thousands of dollars, an absolute fortune in 1868, to a single individual who promised astronomical, impossible returns of up to 10% profit per month. When detectives tracked the name attached to these massive cash transfers, They did not find a slick Wall Street banker or a notorious city gambler. Instead, the paper trail led straight to the doorstep of a prim, highly respectable 37-year-old housewife named Nancy Clem. Nancy Clem was a remarkable figure who defied every single stereotype of the Victorian era. To her neighbors and the congregation at her local Methodist church, she was the picture of domestic perfection, a quiet woman married to a hard-working, ordinary grocer named William Clem. But behind closed doors, Nancy Clem possessed a brilliant, calculating mathematical mind and a silver tongue that could charm the most skeptical investors. Long before a man named Charles Ponzi would lend his name to the concept, Nancy Clem had independently invented the Ponzi scheme. She traveled in elite circles, whispering to wealthy businessmen that she possessed exclusive, highly lucrative contracts to buy and sell wholesale patent medicines across the Midwest. She claimed the business was so profitable that she could guarantee massive returns to anyone who gave her capital. But there was a catch. The investments had to be kept strictly confidential to prevent competitors from catching on. In reality, there was no patent medicine empire. Nancy Clem was simply taking cash from new investors like Jacob Young and using it to pay off the promised monthly returns to older investors, pocketing a massive cut for herself along the way. For nearly 2 years, this fragile house of cards stood perfectly strong, funded by the endless greed of Indianapolis's upper class, who were completely blinded by the quick profits. Nancy Clem lived a double life of absolute luxury, purchasing expensive real estate and fine goods under assumed names while maintaining her humble housewife persona at home. But by late August 1868, the mathematics of the fraud began to catch up with her. The pool of new investors was drying up, and her older clients were demanding the return of their principal investments. Chief among those demanding his money back was Jacob Young. Detectives discovered that Jacob Young had realized something was deeply wrong with the medicine business. He had invested his life savings with Nancy Clem, and when she began making excuses for delaying his monthly payout, he threatened to expose her operation to the authorities and file a public lawsuit. Such an exposure would not only destroy Nancy Clem's lucrative lifestyle, but it would also result in her immediate imprisonment in an era where women faced harsh societal ruin for criminal behavior. The prosecution would later argue that Nancy Clem realized there was only one way to save her empire and keep her secrets safe. She had to eliminate Jacob Young before he could speak to the banks. When the police formally arrested Nancy Clem at her home, the city of Indianapolis was thrown into a state of utter shock. The public refused to believe that a proper, church-going woman could be capable of planning a brutal double execution in the woods. Nancy maintained an eerie, completely unbothered composure during her initial interrogation. She spoke in a calm, melodic voice, adjusting her fine silk dress as she told detectives that she had absolutely nothing to do with the murders. She claimed she had spent the entire afternoon of September 12th resting at home, suffering from a severe headache. Her husband, William, completely bewildered by the sudden arrest, fiercely defended his wife, swearing to reporters that Nancy was a gentle soul who couldn't bear the sight of blood. However, the police were methodically building an ironclad circumstantial case. They discovered that Nancy Clem had not acted entirely alone. She had inquired the help of a local scoundrel and petty criminal named William Abrams, as well as a former business associate named Silas Hartman. Hartman, crucially, was the brother of Nancy Clem's close friend. When investigators raided the properties of these accomplices, they found a wealth of incriminating physical evidence. In William Abrams' possession, they discovered a heavy, double-barreled shotgun and a pistol. Forensic testing was in its absolute infancy in 1868, but gunsmiths were able to determine that the lead balls recovered from the skulls of the young couple perfectly matched the caliber and unique casting molds of the weapons found in Abrams' home. The pressure on the accomplices proved to be the breaking point for the case. Silas Hartman, terrified of facing the gallows for a murder he claimed he only helped cover up, broke down in his jail cell. He confessed to detectives that Nancy Clem had masterminded the entire plot. He revealed that on the afternoon of September 12th, Nancy had lured Jacob and Nancy Young to the secluded clearing at Cold Spring under the pretense of finally handing over their entire investment principal in cash. Instead of bringing money, Nancy Clem had arrived with Abrams and Hartman, who were armed. Hartman claimed that when the Youngs realized they had been trapped, chaos erupted. Jacob Young was shot down where he stood, and his wife was executed moments later to eliminate the only eyewitness. Hartman admitted that he had helped strike the matches to burn Nancy Young's body in a desperate bid to obscure the identity of the victims. The confession should have sealed Nancy Clem's fate, but the story took an even darker, more sensational turn before the case could reach a jury. Just days after signing his detailed confession, Silas Hartman was found dead in his isolation cell. He had hung himself from the iron bars of his window using a shredded bedsheet. In his pocket, he left a suicide note, reiterating his guilt but claiming he could not live with the shame of what they had done. While the state viewed the death as a tragic validation of the confession, Nancy Clem's high-priced legal team saw it as a massive opportunity. With Hartman dead, his confession could technically be challenged as hearsay in a court of law, since the defense could no longer cross-examine him on the witness stand. The trial of Nancy Clem, which began in early 1870, became a national media circus. Journalists from New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia flooded Indianapolis, filling the columns of the daily newspapers with breathless updates about the infamous gilded monster. The courtroom was packed to maximum capacity every single morning with high society women who treated the murder trial like a theatrical performance, bringing lunches and opera glasses to get a better view of the defendant. Nancy Clem understood the power of public perception perfectly. She appeared in court every day dressed in impeccable mourning attire, holding a delicate lace handkerchief and a leather-bound Bible. She played the role of the fragile, persecuted Victorian woman to absolute perfection, occasionally weeping softly whenever the gruesome details of the crime scene were read aloud. The prosecution's case was led by a brilliant, aggressive district attorney who laid out the financial motive with masterly precision. He brought forward bank managers, accountants, and deceived investors who testified to the staggering scale of Nancy Clem's fraudulent banking operation. They showed that she owed Jacob Young a sum of money she could never hope to repay, and that his death occurred on the exact day his final ultimatum expired. The state also produced an array of surprise witnesses, local farmhands who testified that they had seen a woman matching Nancy Clem's distinct height and physical description riding in a carriage toward Cold Spring, accompanied by two men just an hour before the gunshots were heard by neighbors. Nancy Clem's defense team, bankrolled by the hidden reserves of cash she had successfully secreted away before her arrest, launched a ferocious counteroffensive. They targeted the inherent sexism of the era, arguing to the all-male jury that it was anatomically and psychologically impossible for a refined, gentle woman to plan or witness such a savage act of butchery. They painted the deceased Silas Hartman as the true lone mastermind who had acted out of his own independent greed, and they vigorously attacked the character of the state's witnesses, claiming they were politically motivated liars out to ruin an innocent woman's name. The defense also presented a series of highly questionable alibi witnesses, including members of Nancy's extended family, who swore under oath that she was tucked away in her bed at home during the hours of the murder. The legal battle turned into an absolute marathon. The first trial ended in a hung jury, with the men unable to agree on whether a woman could truly commit such a crime. The state, refusing to let the mastermind walk free, immediately initiated a second trial. This second proceeding was even more sensational, featuring vicious arguments between the lawyers and explosive outbursts from the gallery. Once again, the jury found themselves deadlocked, completely paralyzed by the conflicting circumstantial evidence and the sheer psychological impossibility of the defendant's dual nature. Finally, in a third trial, the prosecution managed to secure a conviction for second-degree murder, and Nancy Clem was sentenced to life in prison at the Indiana State Prison for Women. For most criminals in the 19th century, a life sentence meant disappearing from the public eye forever. But Nancy Clem was far from an ordinary criminal. Even behind the thick stone walls of the penitentiary, her brilliant, manipulative mind never stopped working. She utilized her wealth and her remaining political connections to launch appeal after appeal, constantly challenging the technicalities of the indictment and the admissibility of the circumstantial evidence used to convict her. In a shocking twist of legal maneuvering that stunned the Indiana justice system, Nancy Clem's lawyers successfully argued before the state Supreme Court that her conviction had been based on faulty judicial instructions regarding the nature of second-degree murder. In 1881, after serving only a fraction of her sentence, Nancy Clem was officially released from prison on a legal technicality. She emerged from the prison gates a free woman, but the city of Indianapolis had not forgotten the horror of the Cold Spring murders. Shamed by society and unable to reclaim her former status among the elite, Nancy Clem refused to slide into quiet obscurity. Instead, she did what she did best. She went back to the art of the con. Moving across the state line, she changed her name and began operating as an itinerant peddler of patent medicines and fraudulent health elixirs, continuing to swindle unsuspecting rural families out of their hard-earned money, using the exact same charm that had captivated wealthy businessmen decades prior. She was arrested multiple times for petty fraud and confidence games, a sad cyclical decline for a woman who had once stood at the center of the nation's most lucrative financial empire. Nancy Clem passed away in 1892, taking the absolute, definitive secrets of the Cold Spring clearing with her to the grave. To this day, historians and true crime enthusiasts debate the exact mechanics of what happened beneath the oak trees on September 12, 1868. Did Nancy Clem pull the trigger herself, or did she simply stand by and watch as her hired hands executed the couple who threatened her fortune? The case remains a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked avarice in a young, booming America, and an incredible example of a psychological mastermind who built the world's first documented Ponzi scheme on a foundation of absolute deception, high society manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. While her name has been largely washed away by the tides of history, the ghosts of Cold Spring still echo as one of the most brilliant, unrepeatable mysteries of the old American West.